Movies gotta make money. Everybody knows this, but the financial decisions made during The Hobbit just constantly remind you that this is a commercial product trying to wring as much money out of you as possible. Jackson defends the 3-movie decision by saying it allows the characters to drive the story, but actually I think it's the other way around. Having an extra climax in the middle means that it's actually the story that drives the characters. For example, the 2 pointless action scenes at the end of Desolation wouldn't be there if there were only 2 films. And then there's Bard and Gandalf, both of whom are in prison at the end of the movie, adding 2 additional cliffhangers to the big cliffhanger. But their captures are immediately resolved in the very next scenes in the 3rd movie. The story's need to have a dramatic ending in that 2nd film forces contrivance upon contrivance to have all of the characters in such dire straits that you just have to come back to buy that all-important 3rd ticket. Now, there's some people out there that say that The Hobbit shouldn't even be 2 movies, but I can at least see what Jackson was thinking with that, because the book has a very episodic structure. In just about every chapter, the heroes journey somewhere, are captured, and escape. There's just so many action beats along the way that rushing through them in one 3-hour picture will be like watching a whole movie on fast forward. But the 2-movie structure actually fits perfectly. According to Jackson, the original plan was to have the first movie cover most of the journey to the mountain, ending when they meet Bard, while the 2nd movie would cover the events around the mountain itself. Makes sense. Not for nothing, that would vastly improve the Bilbo and Thorin plotline. Okay, now their relationship is one of the strongest parts of the series, but because the movie is a trilogy, Thorin is forced to accept Bilbo as an equal member of the company far too early. So in Journey, Thorin thinks Bilbo is just like a total weenus up until the point when he saves him from an orc in the forest. That's fine, and the following scene is actually the best part of the whole series.
I've never been so wrong in all my life.
But even though Bilbo shows courage here, it's sort of contrived that the other dwarves wouldn't immediately come to Thorin's aid as well. And in the end, it's not through Bilbo's actions, but through Gandalf calling the eagles that they're all saved. The real time Bilbo proves his worth is in the barrel escape scene. Now a major attraction at Universal Orlando Resort. Bilbo shows how clever and how brave he is in this scene. The result of splitting it into 3 movies means that they end up rushing Thorin's character change, and that the relationship has to just sit in stasis for the entirety of Desolation. 2 of them don't have anything to do until 5 Armies, where their friendship is tested by Thorin being a greedy asshole. Speaking of which, having 3 movies means that Thorin's affliction with dragon sickness comes as a complete surprise at the beginning of the 3rd movie. So the scene is the dwarves that remained in Lake Town finally make it to Erebor, and Bilbo jumps out saying that Thorin's been going crazy over the gold for days. The most important scene of the movie, where Thorin enters Erebor and becomes a greedy asshole, isn't in the movie, because with 3 parts we've got to get straight into the dragon sickness plotline. With just 2 movies, Thorin becoming greedy could have been growing throughout the entire 2nd film. Here it's just thrust upon us without any foreshadowing of it at the end of Desolation. So remind me again why 3 movies was a good idea?
Get more opportunity to actually develop some of these storylines further than what we were otherwise.
Can you give me an example?
We developed up, there's things you'll see in the next movie, particularly to do with Gandalf and Dumbledore that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do.
That's bullshit. It's only 1 scene.
Things with Tariel, Legolas.
Paging Dr. Gundabad.
Bad.
Alright, so let's look at Bard's story. He kills Smaug. This is essential to the plot and could not have been cut. He saves Alfred from being mauled by the mob. This could have been cut. He leads the negotiations with Thorin. That's essential to the plot. He fights in the battle. Essential to the plot. He keeps running into Alfred. That could have been cut. From where I'm sitting, the only stuff of Bard's they could have possibly added to make it 3 films was the stuff with Alfred. So as far as I'm concerned, make it 2 movies and tell Ryan Gage to take a hike. It's not your fault, Ryan, I'm sorry. But by the way, that's exactly what Bard should have done at the beginning of the movie. I mean, why do people keep giving this obviously self-interested and slimy character any responsibility?
Alfred, take the night watch.
How about this? How about the minute they get to Dale, Bard says, "Hey Percy," or whoever, "keep an eye on Alfred and report back to me if he does anything suspicious." And then the moment he does something suspicious, put him in prison. Don't give him the Night's Watch. And then even Gandalf randomly tells him to watch Bilbo, which is a pretty important task seeing as he knows Bilbo has a magic ring, and because he thinks Thorin will kill Bilbo on sight. So why give that job to this schmuck? Sorry, Ryan, it's not you, it's just your character, okay? It just makes Gandalf look like a worse judge of character than Ned Stark. So what then? Is Jackson just straight up lying? Well, here's the thing. I believe Jackson when he says that it was himself and not the studio who pushed for the 3-movie idea. But I believe that the reason he did so has a lot less to do with story than it does with math. You see, The Hobbit is the most expensive trilogy ever filmed. It cost $750 million to make, mostly because it used expensive 3D technology, expensive 5K technology, and expensive fatsuit technology. But even far into production, Jackson was operating under the 2-film idea, meaning that 3 films or 2, The Hobbit would have cost about the same, $750 million. Of all the Hollywood splits of recent years, this one, from 2 to 3, was probably the cheapest relative to the other movies in the franchise. But that $750 million doesn't take into account the elaborate marketing campaigns for each movie.
Try the all-new Hobbit-inspired menu, only at Denny's.
Lego, The Hobbit.
That's a wrap, everyone.
It's estimated that the marketing for the first film alone cost $155 million. If the second movie had a similar marketing budget, then the 2-movie idea would have cost at least $1 billion when all is said and done. Now in hindsight, that doesn't seem so bad. Each of the 3 Hobbit movies made about $1 billion at the box office, so even if they only made 2, they doubled their money. But back in 2012, that was no guarantee. Peter Jackson's previous film, King Kong, made just $550 million. What if the first Hobbit movie underperformed? With only 2 movies, they ran the risk of only just making their money back. He's got a reputation to protect. Seeing as most of the cost can be attributed to expensive technology that Jackson pushed for, would Jackson be able to use it for future films if The Hobbit was a failure? And seeing as he kinda wants the industry to move in the direction of these new technologies, The Hobbit failing could have had industry-wide ramifications. Or, maybe it just all comes out of ego, the desire to make whatever you're working on in the present seem as important as anything you did in the past. Perhaps he just wanted to make it into 3 movies so that it would be as big as The Lord of the Rings. I don't know, but whatever the reason is, I think that Jackson had a motivation outside of story purposes and then found a way to sell it as a story decision afterwards. But you know who isn't greedy? Thorin Oakenshield. What do you mean he's not greedy? He's totally hoarding all that gold to himself, and he broke his word to the men. No he didn't. His proposal is that if the men release him, he'll reclaim his birthright, which will be good for everyone, as it will increase trade in the area.
This was the center of all trade in the north. I would see those days return. I would relight the great forges of the dwarves and send wealth and riches flowing once more from the halls of Erebor.
Laketown, being located right next to Erebor, will have a wealthy neighbor that they can sell things to, as opposed to being completely isolated. He doesn't promise them a specific amount that he would need to pay later, but more of a vague idea that life would get better eventually. But he released the dragon that destroyed their homes. True, but that's sort of their fault for building a city next to a dragon. It's like going on a date with Bill Cosby and not expecting him to tell a long-winded story. What'd you think I was gonna say? And besides, even if he did promise a specific amount, he shouldn't be obligated to pay it because the men of Laketown had imprisoned him and his friends. You can't expect him to keep his word when the consequence of not giving his word was prison, which brings me to Thranduil, who has no business here whatsoever. Thorin isn't being greedy by holding on to the white gems. Thranduil has done far worse things to Thorin than that. He totally abandoned the dwarves when Smaug first showed up, and then later held Thorin prisoner, threatening to do so for centuries. And even then, Thorin says that he's willing to sell them back to Thranduil. He isn't being vengeful and holding on to them indefinitely.
I know an elf lord who will pay a pretty price for these.
He's willing to trade them, but he isn't going to give them away when you put an army on his doorstep and try to bully him into it. What I'm saying is that the men and the elves are being far less reasonable and far more greedy than Thorin is. Thorin just earned the mountain back after braving about 1 million dangers. He earned it. It's also ridiculous that the whole thing is explained as dragon sickness. The whole concept is as stupid and unnecessary as an hour-long review of a movie. Wouldn't it make for a better movie if Thorin's character change had more to do with his own decisions than just some vague disease he's afflicted by?
Dragon sickness seeps into the hearts of all who come near this mountain.
Right, so what about the 12 other dwarves there? Shouldn't they also all be having slow-motion monologues about how awesome gold is?
Not one piece of it.
And another thing, what's actually happening in these scenes? Like, is he actually talking like that in reality? Are we seeing him just from other people's perspective? Or is this Thorin's perspective? Because surely it's not just some cheap editing trick to make the audience think Thorin is being less rational than he actually is. Now maybe I shouldn't complain here, because the three-way negotiation is some of the best stuff of Part 3, but it relies completely on contrived conflicts and audience manipulation. You know, just like making 3 movies in the first place did. Now you might think that after nearly an hour of complaining about these movies that I hate everything about them, but that's not true. There's plenty to like here, and actually what frustrates me most is that the good stuff is constantly upstaged by the bad. For example, Martin Freeman as Bilbo is perfect casting. His characterization is excellent, his mannerisms are hilarious and unique. His entire relationship with Thorin is a highlight, but then again there are huge sections of film where Bilbo isn't in the movie at all. Gollum and Smaug both make for excellent villains in the series, but then there's Azog and Bolg, who couldn't be less interesting. I mean, I'd love to get a sense of why orcs follow Sauron. Like, what could he possibly be promising them that would make a race solely composed of alpha males loyal to him to the death? Or even if I just got a sense of Azog and Bolg's relationship as father and son, instead of Azog just sending his son on 2 missions and then never speaking with him again. I'm also quite fond of the soundtrack. I like how the song the dwarves sing at the beginning is repurposed into their own action theme.
Dungeons deep and caverns old.
And while I clearly wasn't a fan of Legolas, the theme he and the rest of the elves get whenever they're on screen is wonderful. For me, all the problems of the film really come back to a flawed, industry-wide philosophy when it comes to adaptations. You see, even though we finally have the tools to make anything we want happen in a movie, the cost of doing so makes producing blockbuster movies an extremely risky business. Sure, they usually make $1 gazillion, but when even one fails, they can absolutely cripple a studio. That's why they're focusing more and more resources on safe bets, movies with pre-established fan bases, or a successful director.
You guys, I came all the way from Brazil just because of you.
Thank you.
I spent all my money on this trip, but it was worth it.
By Hollywood standards, The Hobbit, directed by Peter Jackson, is about as surefire a success as you can get. But when you're dealing with an enormously popular franchise like Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, they're too big for their own good. Producers and directors become terrified of doing anything that might piss off the ultra-loyal fan base, which is why book adaptations almost always abide by a philosophy of absolute fidelity. That means trying to make the movie exactly like the book. So I think I'm in the minority when I say I don't care if they follow the book.
We have found the witch, may we burn her? Burn her!
I know, settle down. But here's why I'm right and you're wrong. Number 1, it's impossible. Movies remove the ambiguity of books. 10 different people can have 11 different interpretations of any written phrase. But for a movie, you have to pick one because it's a visual medium, not an imaginative one. So by the sheer nature of adaptation, it's impossible to create movies that are 100% faithful. Some kind of liberties must be taken. Number 2, why do we need to see the same thing twice? It's boring to sit through the same thing twice. In fact, I'm actually more excited by adaptations that are wildly different than their source material. I enjoy the differences between the stories as opposed to policing the movie for not adhering to the almighty book. Just take a look at Stanley Kubrick's films. He's one of the greatest directors ever, and a bunch of his movies are based on books, but he never put any stock in following the source material just for the sake of it. In A Clockwork Orange the movie, Alex relapses back into crime and sex at the very end. In the book, he's rehabilitated. Since the entire movie was about whether or not people can be rehabilitated, this is a pretty big difference. Stephen King has even said he doesn't like Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining, but the film is one of the classics of modern cinema. Would it really be even better if it followed the themes of the book more? These aren't just little changes, by the way. These are major thematic shifts. So if you want to adapt a book, as far as I'm concerned, change whatever you want. Major plot lines, a character's personality, or even the theme. If it's in the interest of making a better movie, go for it. Why? Number 3, creative people are motivated by being creative. When you go to see an adaptation of something, chances are that the people behind it have been working on it for more than 2 years. That's a long time for a creative person to spend in someone else's sandbox. Peter Jackson has now spent 18 years making Middle-earth movies. And I think a lot of the problems with these movies stems back to the fact that Jackson was just fatigued with the source material. I mean, who wouldn't be? Most marriages don't even last 18 years. When he made The Lord of the Rings, his passion for the material just bleeds through every frame of the film. The artistry behind all of the sets and costumes, the attention to to detail, the reverence for the story and its characters. But by the time you reach The Hobbit, I think you can just feel the absence of passion in the over-reliance of CG effects and in the failure to create meaningful emotional moments. That's why I still think it's a travesty the world never got to see Guillermo del Toro's version of The Hobbit. We'll never know if his Hobbit would have been better, but it definitely would have been different. What I'm saying is that if a director is more passionate about a project by being disloyal to the source material, all the better. So let me amend my statement here. I don't care if they follow the book, so long as they make something good. Really, the problem is that as fans of a book, we tend to treat directors as somehow lesser creators than authors. That directors should just be the silent middleman who delivers the book we like to the big screen in exactly the way we like it. But instead, we should see every adaptation as the director's version of the book, and not the book, directed by what's-his-name. Books are not sacred. They can have flaws, and a good adapter should recognize what these flaws are and work to change them. When it comes to The Hobbit, I feel like Jackson did recognize what some of the flaws of the book were, but instead of changing it or improving upon it, he simply adds more material to it.
Is that they make it the book and something else.
So I have a question. Why is it okay to add extra elements to the story, but it isn't okay to take elements away? Tauriel was added to the story because The Hobbit lacked female characters, and as I've said before, having her there was a good idea in theory, even though it didn't really pan out. But the biggest problem the film has is too many dwarves. I think 13 dwarves could have worked if there were less emphasis on action and more emphasis on characterization, but even still it would have been much easier to tell the story if there were only 6 or 7 of them. Like if the entire company was the leader, the mentor, the angry one, the comedic relief, and the gay guy. Each of their personalities would have been that much easier to identify and made the group dynamics easier to portray. So what's the problem with cutting a few of the dwarves out of the story? Well, the answer is us. We're the problem. I think the only reason Jackson didn't get rid of the one part of the book he dreaded was because he knew the fans wouldn't stand for it. And that's sort of a shame, because personally I'd rather have a better movie than a more faithful adaptation. So with a cast of characters we never truly get to know, action scenes that are more disorienting than exciting, a love story that is never fully developed, references that distract from the emotional payoffs of the story, plot lines that lack resolution, and an act structure that is stretched beyond the breaking point, The Hobbit collapses under its own bloated weight.
Not beat about the bush.
Thank you so much for watching all the way through this extremely long rant. I've got so much more content planned and I can't wait to share it with all of you. That includes the Sage Rants podcast, where I'll be analyzing every single blockbuster that comes out this year. I'll also have more movie rants like this one, and I'm going to start up a series called The Best Pictures, where I'll be taking a look at every movie to ever win the Academy Award for Best Picture. So if you're interested in any of that, please subscribe to this channel. And if you know anyone who complains about The Hobbit or talks about movies a lot, make sure to share this video with them, because I've got at least one more movie in mind in need of an epic Sage rant.